In a small mountain village, hidden between fog-covered cliffs and winding stone paths, lived a man named Ren. Ren was kind, thoughtful, honest. But if there was one thing he did more than anything else, it was explaining himself. Whenever someone misunderstood him, he explained. When someone questioned his actions, he defended. Even when no one asked, he felt the need to justify his choices. He believed that if people just understood him, they would stop judging. That if he said the right words, they would finally see his truth. But they didn't. No matter how clearly he spoke, some people twisted his words. Others doubted his motives. And the worst of them, simply didn't care to listen at all. One afternoon, after yet another exhausting conversation that left him feeling small, Ren went to visit an old monk who lived in a quiet temple above the village. He bowed low and said, "Master, I keep trying to explain who I am, but the more I speak, the less people seem to hear." The monk looked at him and said nothing. Instead, he picked up a jug of water and poured it into a cup. Then he poured more and more until the cup overflowed, spilling across the table. Ren watched in confusion. "You see," the monk said, "some people are already full. No matter what you pour into them, they cannot hold what you offer." Ren sat in silence, watching the water spill across the table. The monk poured no more, just waited. Then finally said, "You think your words will empty their doubts, but their doubts were never yours to fix." Ren looked down, unsure how to respond. "I just don't want to be misunderstood," he said. The monk nodded. "That's a natural desire. But ask yourself, why does it hurt so much when someone doesn't see you clearly?" Ren hesitated. "Because maybe I'm still trying to prove something." The monk's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "Exactly," he said. "You explain yourself not just to others, but to the parts of you that still doubt your own worth." Ren felt a weight in his chest. The monk was right. He wasn't just defending himself from others. He was defending himself to himself. Every time he justified his path, it wasn't just to be understood. It was to feel valid, to feel enough. "But isn't it right to be clear?" Ren asked. "To speak truth? To be honest?" The monk smiled gently. "Yes, but truth doesn't always need an audience, and honesty doesn't always require explanation." He leaned in slightly. "The loudest truths are the ones lived, not spoken." Ren looked out the window, watching a bird take flight into the fog. And for the first time, he wondered, what would happen if he stopped trying to be understood and simply allowed himself to be?
A few days after his visit to the temple, Ren returned to the village. He felt different, still unsure, but lighter. Like a weight had shifted, even if just slightly. But the village hadn't changed. People still questioned him. A neighbor asked, "Why did you leave your job?" That position was secure. A cousin said, "You're being selfish, living alone like this." An old friend laughed. "You think walking around in silence makes you wise?" And with each comment, Ren felt the old instinct rise again. Explain, defend, prove. But this time, he didn't. He simply smiled. Not out of arrogance, not out of indifference, but because he finally understood. They weren't actually asking to understand. They were speaking from their own fears, their own limits, their own need to control what didn't belong to them. And no amount of explanation could fix that. That night, he sat quietly under a tree near his home and replayed all the times he had bent his truth to make others comfortable. All the times he shrank himself to fit into their version of what made sense. And he asked himself, who am I trying to convince? The answer came like a whisper in the wind. No one. Not anymore.
If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing. and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next.
Days passed. Ren spoke less, but listened more. He stopped over-explaining, stopped justifying, stopped translating his truth into language others could tolerate. At first, people noticed and didn't know what to do with his silence. Some thought he was distant. Others thought he was arrogant. But a few, just a few, started wondering something else. What if he's not cold? What if he's just grounded? One evening, his younger sister came to him. She had always been the one who challenged him the most. "I used to think you stayed quiet because you didn't have anything to say," she said. Ren looked up, calm. She hesitated. "But now, it feels like you're just done trying to convince people who've already decided." He smiled gently. "I don't owe my story to everyone," he said, "especially those who've never listened with open hands." His sister sat beside him, silent. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just understood. And in that space, free of defense, free of noise, a real connection formed, not built on explanations, but on presence.
If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next.
One afternoon, Ren was invited to a village gathering, a place he'd once felt welcome in, before he stopped explaining himself. As he entered, the room quieted for a moment. Not out of respect, out of curiosity. People whispered, "He thinks he's better now. He just walks around acting wise. I bet he doesn't even know what he's doing." And then, one voice rose above the others, an old friend, once close. "You used to tell us everything," he said sharply. "Now you act like your silence is some kind of answer." All eyes turned to Ren, and the old version of him, the one that needed approval, the one that wanted to be liked, almost stepped forward. Almost. But he didn't. He looked at his friend, not with anger, not with pride, but with peace. "You're free to believe what you want," Ren said softly. "But I don't owe my truth to anyone who's already made up their mind." There was no applause, no dramatic ending, just quiet. But in that quiet, something shifted. The room didn't know how to respond, because they had no defense against someone who refused to defend himself. Ren stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs. And for the first time, he didn't feel the urge to explain what he felt, or why he walked away. He just walked.
If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next.
Ren no longer avoided people. He simply stopped offering himself to every conversation. He spoke when it mattered, and when it didn't, he let silence speak for him. His life became quieter, simpler, but not empty. There was clarity now. No more wasting energy trying to convince the unwilling. No more explaining himself to people who were only listening to respond. One day, the monk from the temple visited his village. They walked together through the fields in silence, until the monk finally asked, "You've stopped speaking so much. Does that feel like freedom? Or loneliness?" Ren smiled gently. "It feels like truth." He paused, then added, "Not everyone deserves to know the whole story. Some things belong only to me." The monk nodded, pleased. "When you stop offering your truth to those who haven't earned your trust," he said, "you stop bleeding energy into empty hands." They stood beneath a blooming plum tree, its petals falling with the breeze. And in that quiet moment, Ren felt something rare. Not pride, not relief, but sovereignty. He had finally reclaimed his voice, by choosing when and if to use it. Have you ever felt exhausted from explaining yourself to people who never really wanted to understand? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes your silence speaks louder than their noise.